Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a subject you thought you knew and really unpack the layers until we get to the core of why it's still shouting at us from across the centuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, we are taking a journey not just through literature, but through a social portrait so vivid. I mean, the people we meet feel startlingly contemporary.
Indeed. We are opening Geoffrey Chaucer's general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. And look, if you associate this work with, dusty textbooks or really difficult Middle English, we need to forget that right now. This is, like you said, it's basically the 600-year-old reality show casting call.
I think the reality show framing is perfect.
Yeah.
It really is. Because it immediately grounds the work in, human interaction and conflict.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
set the scene. It's April, dawn in Southwark, just outside London. They're gathered at the Tabard Inn. You can almost smell it, can't you? The air is thick with the smell of wet wool, maybe some ale, the recent spring rain.
And yeah, probably the faint scent of horse manure, let's be honest.
Probably. And you see this restless crowd.
Yeah, these are not tourists in the modern sense. They are pilgrims. They've come from pretty much every corner of English society. You've got the worn leather and chainmail of the knight right next to you.
The crisp, expensive furs of the monk.
Exactly. And then the ostentatious, somewhat vulgar scarves of the wife of Bath. It's quite a mix.
It really is a snapshot of a nation in flux. We have these 29 pilgrims, plus Chaucer himself as the narrator, and of course the booming figure of the host, Harry Bailey.
Right.
And they are embarking on this journey of shared spiritual purpose, a pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of a shared social experiment, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That moment, that specific setting where let's say the social hierarchy of the road temporarily replaces the hierarchy of the court, that is the genius of the general prologue.
It really is.
It is the ultimate ensemble cast list, where everyone's carefully constructed persona is about to be put to the test.
Okay, so our mission today is to move well beyond the summary you might have read in school. We want to extract the historical bits, the psychological stuff, the sociological nuggets.
All of it.
That make the prologue this kind of literary mirror one that just keeps reflecting our own anxieties, doesn't it? About institutions, personal branding, social mobility.
It's uncanny how much it reflects.
So let's unpack this. Let's find out what made Chaucer such a, revolutionary figure, and why these 14th century figures still feel like our neighbors.
Okay, so to really appreciate the sometimes corrosive social critique happening in the prologue, we have to place ourselves firmly back in the late 14th century, think the 1380s.
Right.
Chaucer worked on this whole project on and off until his death around 1400. And this was not a period of stability or, tidy medieval order, not at all.
Quite the opposite from what I gather. But maybe let's start with Chaucer's most foundational choice, the really big one, the language.
The language, yes.
He chose to write in a language that wasn't really considered, worthy of high art back then.
Exactly. I mean, for centuries after the Norman conquest in 1066, the language of the court, the aristocracy, high culture, it was all French.
Right, and Latin for the church.
And Latin for scholarship, theology, high church doctrine, yes. So Chaucer makes this really radical decision to use Middle English, the vernacular, the language of the common people.
That feels like a statement in itself.
Oh, it was a huge statement. It was a radical, almost democratic act. It elevated the common spoken tongue, the language people actually used every day, to the status of enduring literature.
That immediately gives the work a much wider sort of national reach, doesn't it? It suggests the stories and lives of, ordinary English speakers were just as worthy of recording as those of the French-speaking elite.
Absolutely. And what's crucial here is that Chaucer himself wasn't some, isolated academic monk in a tower.
No, he was out in the world.
He was very much out in the world, a quintessential cosmopolitan figure. He was a governmental bureaucrat, a customs official, a diplomat who traveled extensively. He went to France, to Italy.
So he knew the high-status languages and literatures.
He did. His daily job exposed him to diverse people, multilingual sources, Latin, French, and crucially, Italian writers like Petrarch and Boccaccio. He was steeped in the high literary traditions.
Which he then kind of subverted using the maybe rougher, more vibrant voice of English.
Precisely. He had the pedigree, the exposure to international literature, but he chose the language of the English marketplace to tell a distinctly English story.
And that marketplace, as we sort of touched on, was reeling from some pretty cataclysmic events.
Yes, we absolutely have to talk about the social and economic earthquake that provided the entire backdrop. The Black Death.
Which had swept through England when? The 1340s, 1350s?
Roughly, yes. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a health crisis, though it was horrific. It was a fundamental shift in economic power.
Because so many people died.
Exactly. It caused massive social disruption and, most importantly, huge labor shortages. I mean, if you lose an estimated 30, maybe even 50% of the population. The survivors suddenly hold all the cards, all the leverage, wages just skyrocketed. Landowners, the aristocracy, they actually had to negotiate with peasants and laborers.
Which must have completely shaken up the old order.
It accelerated social mobility at a frantic pace, and that created immense tension between the classes.
That tension sounds key, because it challenged the traditional, supposedly stable, medieval hierarchy.
We're talking about the medieval tripartite model of estates. You know, the idea that society was divided neatly into three groups.
Right, those who pray, those who fight, those who work.
Orators, the clergy, bellators, the nobility, and labradors, the commoners. Now, Chaucer's pilgrimage is brilliant because, yes, it includes the knight and the monk who fit those old roles. But it is flooded with new figures, people who don't fit neatly. We see the merchant, the shipman, the franklin, the wife of Bath.
People whose status comes from trade or skill or just money, not necessarily land or birthright.
Exactly. The very presence of these characters on this pilgrimage demonstrates that the old tripartite model was, well, fundamentally breaking down. It just didn't map onto reality anymore.
And the pilgrimage itself is such a perfect literary device for capturing that breakdown, that subversion, by throwing them all together on the road.
He forces these competing social roles into close quarters. They have to interact.
It lets him use the framework of the traditional estate satire, where poets would, critique the flaws within each class, but he does it dynamically.
Yeah.
Through characters talking, arguing, telling stories.
Right, not just through abstract moralizing, it's alive.
And if the Black Death wasn't destabilizing enough, politically, this era under Richard II was incredibly volatile. There's the Peasants' Revolt.
1381, yeah, that's vital context. The Peasants' Revolt was this raw, explicit explosion of class tension and resentment, aimed right at the aristocracy and the church, fueled by economic hardship, unfair taxes, wage controls.
So Chaucer's audience, they lived through this. They understood the stakes.
They understood firsthand the danger and the possibility inherent in social upheaval, in social climbing, in institutional failure. His work wasn't written for, a polite tea party. It was for a volatile, anxious, changing society.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. This deeply unstable reality.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder how Chaucer, the diplomat, the worldly guy, borrowed literary devices from abroad to capture this distinctly English chaos. He didn't invent the frame narrative, did he? The story within a story idea.
No, the frame tale itself was an established device. He was undoubtedly influenced by Italian models, specifically Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron.
Ah, yes, the famous one where the wealthy nobles flee the plague in Florence and tell stories in a fancy villa to pass the time.
Right. But think about Boccaccio's frame. It's exclusive, it's aristocratic, it's designed for distraction from the horrors outside.
Okay.
What Chaucer does is radically different. It's democratic. He adapts that frame, but sets it on a common pilgrimage. A social activity potentially open to all classes, even if some couldn't afford it easily.
Right, much more inclusive.
And he uses it specifically to critique English society from within. His binding element isn't fear of the plague, it's supposed shared devotion, which, ironically, just serves to expose the lack of true devotion in figures like the pardoner and the friar.
So that shift from an exclusive frame to an inclusive one is really what makes a prologue feel like a national portrait.
Precisely. Before we dive into the characters themselves, you mentioned the physical artifacts. We rely on these to understand the period, and you brought up the importance of two manuscripts.
Yeah?
The Ellesmere and the Hengwart. Why does the visual aspect, the look of the manuscript, matter so much here?
Right, these weren't just texts.
Not at all. The Ellesmere manuscript in particular, it's a stunning artifact. Utterly beautiful. Its lavish illuminations, the little paintings of each pilgrim. They weren't just decoration. They were, you could argue, an early attempt to visually canonize Chaucer's characters.
Like fixing their image.
Exactly. Imagine an artist, probably working not long after Chaucer's death, deciding, okay, this is what the knight looked like, this is what the wife of Bath wore, this is how the parson held himself.
So the manuscript culture itself visually staged the text for later readers.
Precisely. The Ellesmere gave us that iconic portrait lineup, the image we often see reproduced. It helped fix the imagery of the pilgrims for centuries. It shows us that reception isn't just about reading words, it's about visualization. The manuscript acted as the first casting director, in a way.
Shaping how readers visually cast the characters right from the start, cementing their reputations, maybe for better or worse.
Better or worse, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the historical stage, set a country in social turmoil, captured in this radical new choice of language, Middle English. Now let's turn the microscope onto the characters themselves. It's often said Chaucer is credited with creating some of the first truly, psychologically complex characters in English literature. Why does that description stick so well?
Well, I think it sticks because he moves so far beyond simple archetypes or stereotypes. His approach uses these incredibly vivid, individuated portrayals, right? Sketched with immense economy, but also specificity.
Yeah.
He doesn't just give us the good monk as a type. He gives us a specific monk who loves hunting, wears expensive fur-trimmed robes, has greyhounds, and basically ignores his vows.
Yeah.
It's this guy.
You can easily kind of slot them into a type, the jolly landowner, the sleazy church official, but then Chaucer immediately adds those quirky contradictions, those little details that make them stick in your memory. You feel like you know this person.
That's the psychological durability, I think. The characters stick because, yes, they tap into our basic human pattern recognition. We recognize the type. But then Chaucer constantly nudges us. He makes us notice the gaps, the inconsistencies.
Yes, you do that.
Often by telling us what they should be, according to their social role, and then immediately showing us what they are, usually through small, telling physical details or actions.
Okay, let's take an example. The prioress, Madame Eglantine. She's a prime case of this contradiction, isn't she? She's a nun, but she seems obsessed with courtly manners.
Oh, completely. She swears only a very mild, dainty oath by St. Loy, which is almost an affectation itself. And Chaucer spends an almost absurd amount of time detailing her table manners.
Yeah, how she never lets a drop fall from her lips, wipes her cup perfectly clean.
Exactly. She even speaks French, but crucially, it's the French of Stratford-at-Bow, like a provincial boarding school, not proper Parisian French. It signals aspiration, maybe not achievement.
Right. And all this fastidiousness, this obsession with worldly politeness and outward appearance, it immediately suggests, well, it masks potential moral gaps, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And then there's the detail about the mouse, remember?
Oh yeah, she weeps if she sees a mouse caught in a trap.
Or if someone hits her little dogs. Yet she's essentially abandoning her core spiritual duties, caring for the poor, devotion for a life of soft luxury, and frankly, sentimentality.
So she's trading genuine spiritual empathy for this kind of worldly, almost performative feeling.
Performative is the perfect word. She's more concerned with appearances, with etiquette, than with poverty or the genuine suffering around her. And then the brooch, the final touch.
Engraved with Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all.
Which could mean divine love, the love of God. But given everything else we know about her, her material desires, her courtly airs, it strongly suggests courtly or romantic love. It's classic Chaucerian ambiguity, that little wink.
And you start to realize that often the most outwardly religious figures in the prologue are the most corrupt or worldly, which feels, well, incredibly current. It immediately invites you, the reader, to project your own contemporary concerns onto these figures. Who's the hypocrite today?
Exactly. And who is the genuine article? Because he gives us this too. The parson and his brother, the plowman, they're the genuine heroes of the pilgrimage, really. The poor, honest clergy and the hardworking, faithful laborer.
But they get less description, don't they?
Far less vivid detail than the corrupt characters like the pardoner or the summoner. Why? Probably because, let's face it, virtue is often less psychologically interesting, less dramatic than vice. Chaucer understood that.
Okay, so when you throw all these individuals together, these complex, contradictory people, the pilgrimage itself becomes a kind of sociological laboratory. This group of disparate classes, knight, wife of Bath, miller, prioress, they have to somehow negotiate travel, conversation, even authority.
Primarily the authority of the host, Harry Bailey, yeah. He sets the terms of the storytelling contest, tries to keep order.
It's a microcosm of social interaction, isn't it? It reveals the mechanics of how groups stick together or maybe how they challenge each other. The moment they hit the road, the usual hierarchy feels suspended.
It is suspended to a degree. And the hierarchy of the narrative, who tells the best story, whose story gets the most laughs or shocks, who gets to tell the next story, that takes over.
And how do they handle the inherent tension of being thrown together like this?
Yeah.
Especially when you have, say, a low-born drunk character like the miller immediately challenging the aristocracy.
Well, one crucial element is humor.
Right. Satire, irony.
Satire, irony, and sheer ribaldry, yeah. It acts as a kind of social lubricant, but it's also a really powerful critical tool. It allows uncomfortable truths to be spoken, maybe without causing an actual brawl in the tavern.
It softens the critique just enough to make it palatable, maybe, while still exposing institutional failures, especially in the church. Maybe the justice system.
Definitely. But is it truly just humor? I mean, isn't The Miller's Tale, which is incredibly crude and directly mocks the aging carpenter, making fun of the upper-class pretensions of the student character, isn't that actually an act of narrative aggression? Doesn't that risk fracturing the group?
That's a great question.
I think it absolutely is narrative aggression. We see the group dynamics play out explicitly in those disputes over storytelling order. The host, Harry Bailey, intends for the knight to go first, respecting the highest social rank.
Makes sense.
But the miller, drunk and explicitly lowborn, interrupts. He insists on telling his bawdy tale immediately after the knight's very noble courtly romance.
That's a deliberate challenge.
It's a deliberate, dramatic contestation of authority. It shows how in-group norms form like the knight goes first, and how they can be instantly shattered by an individual asserting their voice, however drunkenly.
If we put on our academic hats for a second, the source material points to a few powerful theories that help explain why this sociological structure works so well on us. The idea of narrative identity seems key.
Yes, absolutely. The idea that the pilgrims construct their identity not just by what they wear or their job title, but by the stories they choose to tell and, crucially, the way they perform them.
So identity is performative. It's changeable.
It's performative and mutable, exactly. The knight wants to perform modesty despite his prowess. The pardoner performs piety to sell fake relics. The wife of Bath performs experience and authority.
And then there's social identity theory. How does that fit?
Well, this speaks to how the pilgrims are constantly juggling things. They're managing their individual reputations within this specific traveling group right now on this road, but they're also aligning or sometimes clashing with their broader class or professional identities.
You mean example?
Okay, the monk. He has to balance his identity as a cleric, that's his group identity, with his very specific identity as this wealthy, rebellious individual who flouts the monastic rules. The group is judging both him as a person and the whole category of monks he represents.
Right, okay. And finally, the one that sounds like the most fun, Bachtin's Carnival.
Ah, the carnivalesque. That's a great lens for the tales. Think of the pilgrimage as a temporary vacation from the strictures of normal hierarchy. It's like a road trip where the usual rules don't strictly apply, or at least they're up for grabs.
Timeout zone.
Exactly. This temporary suspension of normative hierarchy is what the Russian theorist Mikhail Bakhtin called the carnivalesque. And it allows for a special kind of truth-telling, carnivalesque truth-telling, often through subversive tales.
Like the really bawdy ones, the fablio.
Precisely. Like the fablio that completely invert the usual order of power, making fun of the rich, the corrupt clergy, the pompous. On the road, in this carnivalesque space, the miller can be as important, maybe even more important for a moment, than the knight, simply because he grabs the audience and tells a crapping, if crude, story.
Okay, the 14th century might seem incredibly distant, but the sociological anxieties, the psychological games Chaucer captures, they feel profoundly relevant today, don't they? Let's draw some of those modern parallels, maybe starting with institutional trust.
Oh, absolutely. Chaucer's, profound distrust of clerical corruption. The whole idea that the people supposedly tasked with saving your soul are actually just trying to fleece you.
Yeah.
That resonates so deeply with our contemporary debates about institutional trust, whether it's government, corporations, religious institutions, even the media. We are constantly questioning the authenticity of authority figures, aren't we?
Yeah.
Looking for the inevitable moral gaps, the hypocrisy.
We really are. And that post-Black Death social flux you described, where new money and new classes were emerging, that seems to echo our modern economic reality too, especially maybe current labor anxieties.
I think it does, very strongly. The source material highlights this really well. The emergence of those merchant and artisan figures, the new middle class rising through skill, trade, enterprise, it echoes today's narratives around entrepreneurs, startups, and definitely the social mobility challenges and anxieties associated with the modern gig economy.
Right, people trying to carve out a living outside the traditional structures.
Exactly. Society rearranged itself then, partly due to plague and labor shifts. Technology and globalization are rearranging economic status now. That striving, ambitious merchant Chaucer describes, he's a figure we still see everywhere, trying to make it.
But maybe the perfect, almost chilling case study for a direct modern parallel has to be the pardoner. He just feels like the original grifter, the ultimate con artist.
The pardoner is frighteningly eternal. Chaucer gives us these absolutely chilling details about his whole operation. He preaches eloquently, beautifully even, but he openly admits, at least to the other pilgrims in his prologue, that he does it solely for financial gain. Greed is his only motivation.
And the fake relics.
Oh, the fake relics are astonishing. He claims he has a piece of the sail from St. Peter's boat. He has pig bones that he passes off as miracle-working saints' bones. He has a pillowcase he claims was the Virgin Mary's veil.
And he makes money off this.
He makes a fortune. He profits by preying on the parishioners' deepest fears, fear of sin, fear of damnation.
So let me get this straight. He openly admits his corruption, at least to his fellow travelers, openly talks about selling fake relics and pardons to prey on their fear.
Yeah.
Yet he still profits. How does that work?
The mechanism is identical, absolutely identical to the modern grifter or maybe some kinds of manipulative influencers. He offers a quick, purchasable solution, a spiritual shortcut. Buy this relic, buy this pardon to a deeply complex existential problem. Think of the modern wellness guru selling dubious supplements, or the finance bro selling a guaranteed path to wealth. They generate fear of illness, fear of poverty, fear of missing out, and then they offer an expensive, simple, purchasable solution, a quick fix.
Promising relief from complex issues.
Exactly. The psychological loop is precisely the same 6 centuries later, leveraging performance, rhetoric, and fear for profit. It's stunningly relevant.
Wow, that deep dive into the pardoner is really compelling. Okay, shifting gears slightly to narrative structure. The prologue itself is often cited as a foundational text for the modern ensemble cast template we see everywhere.
Yes, that's a really powerful structural legacy, isn't it? The prologue is arguably a foundational framing device for the kind of modern ensemble cast we see in so much contemporary media.
Like what?
Well, think of sprawling TV series like The Wire, maybe, where you follow a huge cast across different social strata, cops, dealers, politicians, dock workers, or even anthology shows like Black Mirror, where a common theme or frame links disparate stories together.
Okay, I see that.
It's the perfect structure for showcasing multiple, often conflicting perspectives without necessarily prioritizing a single viewpoint. You get the whole messy picture.
And this influence pops up in adaptations too, right? People borrowing Chaucer.
Absolutely. That film, A Knight's Tale, from 1999?
Yeah, with Heath Ledger.
Right. It features Chaucer himself, played by Paul Bettany, as this witty, slightly roguish, friendly companion character. It shows how easily his persona, or a version of it, and his narrative structure can be repurposed and made accessible for a mass modern audience. He becomes a character who can cross genres.
Why do you think that is?
Because the core human dynamics he established, the rivalries, the performances, the desires, are just so recognizable, so enduring.
And the most striking modern echo, which you touched on earlier with the performative aspect, is the social media parallel. The idea of the persona as a curated product.
Oh, that's where the performative identity comes back with a vengeance. Every single pilgrim in the prologue is curating a profile. Think about it. They choose their attire, their equipment, which, remember, for a medieval person, represented a massive financial commitment and social signal.
Like crafting your 14th century profile picture and bio.
Precisely. The knight is modest, almost understated in his dress, which paradoxically signals his genuine high status he doesn't need to show off. The monk, conversely, is lavishly dressed in expensive furs, signaling his wealth and disregard for monastic vows.
And the wife of Bath?
Huge, complex headgear, scarlet red stockings, signaling her wealth, her boldness, her worldliness, her experience. They are all curating their speech, their costume, their behavior, their reputations. This directly, uncannily prefigures the concept of the personal brand.
Wow.
Or the meticulously curated profile we see on Instagram, LinkedIn, everywhere today. You are, in Chaucer's world and maybe still in ours, what you project.
That's a powerful connection. Now, for those encountering Chaucer, maybe in a classroom, in an educational context, connecting this profound relevance must be key to making the text accessible, right? Because the language is hard.
And it's absolutely essential. Yes, the language barrier of Middle English is real. It's significant. We definitely need good translations like Neville Coghill's Modern English Version, which is very widely used, and creative retellings to unlock the work for more people.
But the payoff is worth it.
Oh, the benefit of studying the prologue is immense, I think. It really enhances cross-disciplinary thinking. It forces you to use history, sociology, literary analysis all at once. And it teaches tools that are crucial for modern media literacy.
Like what?
Like how to spot narrative voice, how to detect irony, how to understand satire in complex situations. These are skills we need constantly today when navigating information.
And the source mentioned a classroom example I loved. Having instructors assign students to actually role-play a pilgrim's voice.
Yes. That's brilliant for building narrative empathy, isn't it? It forces the student to step into that 14th century social role, to try and understand why the miller might resent the reeve, or why the knight chooses to tell the story he does, or why the prioress acts the way she does.
It's like a direct descendant of Chaucer's own theatricality in those initial character sketches, making you inhabit the role.
Exactly. It taps into that core performance element. Okay, as we dive deeper, we really need to address some common misconceptions, because the popular image of the Canterbury Tales is often much, much tidier than the messy historical reality.
Right, and the biggest myth, probably the one that trips people up most often, is that the tales are some kind of finished, unified, perfectly structured masterpiece.
That is absolutely false, and it's important to know that. The tales are fragmentary, incomplete. Chaucer experimented with the order, the overall plan throughout his life. The manuscript evidence clearly shows he kept shifting things around, adding links, maybe rethinking character arcs.
And he died before finishing it.
He died before completing the grand cycle he seems to have envisioned, yeah. So the structure we typically read today, including the generally accepted order of the tales, that was largely imposed much later by earlier editors.
Editors who wanted it to look neat and finished.
Pretty much. They wanted a nice, coherent, finished product. But this editorial tidiness, while helpful in some ways, definitely complicates our canonical readings. We have to remember we're often reading an artificial structure, not necessarily Chaucer's final fixed intent, if he even had one.
Yeah, so any scholarly discussion about what the tales mean has to constantly grapple with the fact that we don't actually have the definitive author-approved sequence or ending.
Exactly. And we also have to remember the context of how these stories circulated initially. The prologue and the tales didn't just exist as pristine manuscripts tucked away in libraries, they circulated orally too.
People read them aloud.
Absolutely. Performance mattered hugely. Chaucer likely expected the rhythms, the distinct, highly personalized voices of his pilgrims. You know, the lisp of the friar he mentions, the loud voice of the miller, the high, perhaps shrill voice of the pardoner. He expected those to be heard aloud, not just read silently off a page.
How does that change things?
It affects how we understand the language, the pacing, the humor, the impact of certain lines. It was a more auditory experience for many listeners back then.
Okay, now we absolutely must talk about the controversial content. The tales are medieval texts, products of their time. Reading them through a modern lens, we inevitably encounter elements that are, well, profoundly uncomfortable. Specifically, historical prejudices.
Yes, that is the enduring ethical challenge, isn't it? When teaching or reading the tales today, Chaucer, inevitably reflecting his time and perhaps common sources, reproduces historical prejudices. There are elements that today we would clearly categorize as anti-Semitic, particularly in the prioress's tale, and certainly misogynistic passages or attitudes woven throughout.
So how do we handle that? Modern scholars stress the need for critical framing, right?
Critical framing is essential if the text is to remain a subject of serious, responsible inquiry for modern audiences. We can't ignore these elements, nor can we simply excuse them.
What's the necessary balance then? We can't just dismiss the entire work as, wholly corrupted by history, can we?
No, I don't think so. The key, most scholars argue, is to avoid two extremes. You can't simply dismiss the text wholesale and say, it's prejudice, let's not read it. But equally, you must not engage in what's called anachronistic readings. Meaning, you can't just impose 21st century moral categories and sensitivities directly onto medieval texts and ignore the vastly different historical context, values, and constraints of that time. We need balanced historicization.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
For example, we absolutely must understand the extreme limitations placed on women legally, socially, economically in the 14th century to fully grasp just how radical, how boundary-pushing a figure like the wife of Bath actually was, even if parts of her portrayal rely on misogynistic stereotypes.
So, understanding why the text contains these prejudices, acknowledging their historical reality and the harm they represent, is necessary to study the text responsibly without implicitly normalizing them today.
Precisely. And crucial to this is understanding that Chaucer the writer is not necessarily endorsing every single viewpoint expressed by his characters. The narrator figure is often naive or unreliable. The characters speak for themselves, often damning themselves out of their own mouths.
Which leads us to the fundamental question of Chaucer's own stance.
Yeah.
What kind of satirist was he, really?
The source material and most scholarship suggests he was a complex satirist, maybe even a humanist in some ways, but not a pure moralist or a straightforward anti-clerical radical.
It's not black and white.
Not at all. That nuance is everything. Chaucer clearly, ruthlessly exposes clerical corruption. Look at the friar, the pardoner, the summoner, the monk figures who exploit their positions, prey on the vulnerable, are obsessed with money. But he balances this sharp critique with figures of genuine quiet virtue, like the poor parson and his brother the plowman. They represent the ideal. So he reserves his respect for the spiritual core of religion and for honest labor, even as he skewers its corrupt practitioners.
So his satire is aimed more at institutional failings and individual hypocrisy, the people who exploit faith rather than faith itself.
That seems to be the most widely accepted view. This complexity prevents us from just painting him as simply anti-church or anti-establishment. He sees the good and the bad.
And the wife of Bath. She seems to sit right at the turbulent center of all this ambiguity, which is probably why she remains so fiercely debated after 600 years.
Oh, she is arguably the most fiercely debated, reinterpreted figure in all of English literature, and for very good reason. She possesses this immense agency, this intelligence, this powerful voice, articulating her desires for sovereignty control in marriage and her justification for sexual freedom and multiple marriages. She's a powerhouse. But she was created entirely by a male author in a profoundly patriarchal society. So the endless debate is she a proto-feminist icon challenging the system from within? Or is she actually a carefully crafted misogynistic stereotype embodying all the negative traits men feared in powerful women, designed to show what happens when women get out of control?
And the answer is?
The answer, frustratingly or perhaps brilliantly, is that her ambiguity, her ability to be read compellingly as both, is precisely what has made her such a subject of continuous fascination and critical engagement for centuries. She resists easy categorization.
Okay, for those listening who might be interested in the contemporary academic world surrounding Chaucer, where is the really cutting-edge research focused today? We often hear about the importance of textual criticism, the manuscripts, but where are scholars really pushing the boundaries now?
Right, well, textual criticism remains absolutely fundamental. You can't escape it. We still see intense, detailed focus on the manuscript traditions, understanding the relationship between Ellesmere, Hengwrt, and other key copies. Scholars like the late Derek Purcell, Larry D. Benson laid so much groundwork there.
But beyond that, where are the newer lenses being applied?
Beyond that, we have really thriving fields applying more modern critical lenses. Gender studies is huge, obviously.
Focusing on those performative identities we talked about?
Exactly. Scholars like, say, Carolyn Dinshaw have done landmark work focusing intently on performative identities, medieval sexuality, how gender is constructed and challenged in the tales. They're analyzing how figures like the wife of Bath or even the pardoner with his ambiguous gender presentation challenge or reinforce medieval norms around marriage, virginity, desire, the body.
And queer readings too.
Yes, looking at medieval queer readings is definitely part of that, examining marginal voices, non-normative desires, identities within the tales that push against the dominant heteronormative or traditional religious constraints. The goal is always to reconstruct a fuller, more complex, maybe messier picture of medieval life and subjectivities.
Okay. And what about some of the other alternative angles mentioned, like post-colonial readings? I mean, Chaucer predates colonialism as we usually think of it.
Yeah.
So what are they looking for there?
That's a good question. Post-colonial critiques aren't looking for literal colonies, but they often explore the idea of a nascent English identity emerging against other dominant cultures. They look at how Chaucer, by choosing English over the elite languages of French and Latin, participates in constructing a sense of Englishness, maybe even a kind of linguistic nationalism distinct from continental European dominance.
Oh, language and power.
Language and power, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, the classic Marxist critique remains really strong and relevant, focusing on class conflict, class revolt.
Like that structural conflict you mentioned earlier. The low-born miller literally interrupting the high-born knight's tale, narrative warfare.
Precisely. The Miller's Tale, this incredibly earthy body tale celebrating clever commoners tricking the foolish carpenter and the pretentious student, is often read as a clear literary class revolt. It's an attack not just on the knight's authority, but on the entire aesthetic and value system of the aristocracy represented in the Knight's Tale. It's a revolt through laughter and crudeness.
Fascinating. But scholarship is also moving into these new, almost futuristic, computationally driven frontiers. The source material calls it digital philology and manuscript mapping. What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, this is really interesting stuff. This is where we start treating the text not just as literature, but as data, big data. Researchers are using computational tools to analyze vast amounts of textual information, like automatically aligning spelling variants across dozens of manuscripts, tracking dialect features, mapping patterns in punctuation or scribal errors. They're trying to reconstruct things like performance history or scribal networks.
So instead of relying just on scholarly intuition, they're using algorithms.
Kind of. Algorithms can track, for instance, where certain regions of the text might have circulated geographically based on regional spellings copied by scribes. They can try to identify clusters of errors or unique readings that might indicate relationships between manuscripts. It's using computer science to potentially map the transmission and reception of the text in the 15th century.
Wow. Trying to figure out how the text was likely copied, heard, and maybe performed across England using computers. That sounds like a truly dynamic way to approach literary history.
It really is. And alongside that, we also have the field of cognitive literary studies.
Cognitive, like brain science.
Exactly. This is a relatively new field, but it's using models informed by brain science, by cognitive psychology, to analyze how Chaucer's narrative techniques work on us as readers. How do his brief descriptions, his narrative cues, trigger such strong, immediate, almost empathic responses?
So why do we feel we know these people so well after just a few lines of the prologue?
That's the question they're asking. Cognitive literary scientists might suggest Chaucer instinctively, brilliantly, taps into fundamental human pattern recognition processes, our theory of mind, our ways of modeling other people's intentions and personalities. That could be why his characters feel instantly memorable and relatable across 6 centuries.
It's like mapping the deep architecture of empathy and character recognition. Very cool. Finally, let's just briefly consider global reception. How does this supposed universality of these characters play out when the work leaves the English language and gets translated?
That's another fascinating area. When Chaucer is translated into languages like Japanese, or Urdu, or Spanish, or countless others, translators inevitably have to adapt him. Not just the language, but sometimes the cultural references, the tone, the idioms.
Do they change things?
Sometimes, yes. For example, some translations might choose to soften the sexual humor a bit, or perhaps tone down the wife of Bath's more explicit challenges to authority, maybe to suit different cultural sensibilities or expectations around gender roles or religion.
So Chaucer isn't just a fixed text globally.
Not at all. He's constantly being remixed, filtered, and adapted for new audiences, new contexts, which shows his flexibility in a way.
And globally, digital culture is doing the same thing to his image, isn't it? You mentioned memes.
Oh, absolutely. Online communities, fan works, social media, they're constantly grabbing Chaucer's characters and turning them into avatars for contemporary debates and identity politics. The pardoner becomes a shorthand symbol for crypto scams or televangelists. The wife of Bath becomes an icon or anti-icon in internet debates about feminism or marriage.
So his characters are durable enough to act as political and social shorthand, even today, proving they haven't really aged a day in some respects.
In some very important respects, yeah. They keep getting repurposed because they still speak to something fundamental. #outro.
So, after all this, what does it all mean for us today? The general prologue is clearly so much more than just a historical artifact or a piece of old literature. It seems to capture that dying breath of the medieval world, maybe, and the birth pangs of the Renaissance.
Yeah, that moment of radical social and linguistic change.
And it celebrates humanity in all its messy, contradictory, glorious, and sometimes awful detail.
Its greatest strength, I think, is still that sociological richness. It gave a voice, a literary platform to the rising classes, the merchant, the artisan, the ambitious members of the commons, and in doing so, it created this vibrant, enduring portrait of a nation.
And the travelers themselves feel like prototypes, don't they? Prototypes of our modern public personas, people who perform identities, who deceive, who charm, who fail, who boast, all within the structure of a common shared journey or project.
Absolutely. They are performing for each other, constantly negotiating status.
The prologue really shows us that the conversation itself, the messy exchange of stories and opinions and arguments, that is the real destination, in a way, not just Canterbury.
Well put.
As long as humans gather in groups and tell stories about themselves and each other, whether it's at a roadside inn 600 years ago or maybe in a digital forum today, Chaucer's structure, his way of capturing that dynamic, feels like it will remain the most relevant starting point.
And maybe this is the enduring, provocative question that the text leaves us with, the one we want you listening to carry forward, whether you're analyzing a political debate, company meeting, or just a thread of comments online.
What's the question?
When a diverse group of strangers gathers and exchanges narratives, who gets to tell the story? Whose voice carries authority? And how do those stories, the ones told, the ones silenced, the ones believed, how do they ultimately make, or perhaps unmake, communities?
That is definitely a deep dive for the ages. Thank you so much for traveling with us today on the road to Canterbury.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.